It feels a certain way visually to you to see this pink ink. It's that pinky way. It's pink. Today, we're talking about a super fun, super famous 1974 paper by Thomas Nagel. What is it like to be a bat? This paper was published in 1974 in probably the most prestigious academic philosophy journal that exists in the world, the Philosophical Review, and it's one of the most famous philosophy papers written in the 20th century. Every academic philosopher has heard of and has read this paper. What this paper is doing is it's an attack on physicalism. As you'll remember from earlier in the course, physicalism is the theory that everything in the universe is physical. All the stuff is made up of physical stuff, like protons and neutrons and electrons, whatever it is that the science of physics says exists, that's what exists, and nothing else. So, what that means is that the mind, thoughts and beliefs and desires and hopes and sensory experiences and memories, all mental stuff, that's just some physical stuff, according to physicalism. And dualism, as you remember, that was René Descartes' view. Dualism is the theory that there's two kinds of stuff in the universe. There's the physical stuff, and then there's the mental stuff. And the mental stuff, according to the dualist, is not physical. So what we're getting today in this paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat, is we're getting an attack on physicalism. If we're going to understand that attack, we need to note that physicalism is a reductive theory. A reductive theory says that some phenomenon is nothing more than some other phenomenon. So it reduces the first thing to the second thing. For example, consider lightning. There, that's my best drawing of lightning. Science has discovered, I think, that lightning is nothing more than electric discharge. It's the movement of electrons. That's a reductive theory of lightning. It says that lightning, which is a phenomenon that we observe in the world, it just reduces to, it's nothing more than the movement of electrons, a certain kind of electric discharge. Okay, physicalism is reductive in the same sense. That is, according to the physicalist, the mind is nothing more than some physical stuff. And then there's different versions of physicalism. We talked about behaviorism, that's one version. The mind-brain identity theory, that's another version of physicalism. And functionalism, that was the third version of physicalism that we talked about. All of these different versions differ from one another in that they reduce the mental to different parts of the physical world. The key thing to note here is that if Nagel's attack on physicalism succeeds, then all those versions of physicalism don't work. Nagel is attacking physicalism in general. If he defeats physicalism, then all forms of physicalism are false. One last very quick note before we get started. You might think because this is an attack on physicalism, it's therefore a defense of the dualist theory of mind. As we will see at the end, it's not obvious that that's really the case. So the central concept, or the central idea that Nagel is using in his attack on physicalism is the idea that philosophers and brain scientists call consciousness. And so to illustrate consciousness, let's start with a little bit of a thought experiment. Imagine for a moment what it's like to be 30 feet tall. There's a crude drawing of a person. This is a person, and I put them next to a building so that you could see that they're taller than the building. You can imagine what it's like to be 30 feet tall, right? It would be like basically what your life is like now, except, sometimes you'd look down and you'd see the roofs of buildings and things like that. Or you could rest your arm on the top of a tree or whatever. Okay, you can imagine what it would be like to be 30 feet tall. Now, imagine what it's like to be a rock. There, that's my drawing of a rock. Like a stone, right? Or a boulder or whatever. A rock. Imagine what it's like to be a rock. Got it? No, you don't got it. Because there's nothing that it's like to be a rock. Being a rock is not like just sitting alone in a dark room where you can see nothing or smell nothing or hear nothing and you're just loneliness in darkness. No, that's not what it's like to be a rock. A rock doesn't experience darkness. Close your eyes right now. There's a way it feels to see nothing, to experience darkness, right? And there's a way it feels to breathe in through your nose and smell no significant smells of any kind. There's something that it's like to have, diminished experiences. But a rock has no experiences at all. So there's nothing that it's like to be a rock. It's not like being in the dark. It's not like being lonely. It's not like anything. And of course, that's different from what it's like to be 30 feet tall, which you don't know exactly what it's like to be 30 feet tall, but the point is, it would be like something. It would feel a certain way to be it would feel a certain way to be 30 feet tall, and it wouldn't feel any way at all to be a rock. That thing, the thing that a 30-foot tall person, or you, or a cat, or whatever, that thing that kind of person has, and that a rock doesn't have, that thing is called consciousness. Conscious experience is that feature of mind whereby there's something that it's like to be that being at that time. Here's another example. Okay, suppose we've got a patch of pink. Here's some pink ink on this piece of glass. You can identify that as some pinkness right there, some pink. Okay, I could build a device. Suppose that I built a simple little, computer thing, a very small thing, and all it did was I held it up in front of a colored object, and it could tell whether that object was pink or some other color, right? It's a little color detector. I build it, and it runs on batteries or whatever, and it's this big. Now, here's the thing. You can identify this pink ink, and so can the little color detector that I could build. But there's something extra that you've got when you look at this pink ink on this piece of glass that the little color detector doesn't have at all. That extra thing is that you see what the pinkness looks like. It feels a certain way visually to you to see this pink ink. It's that pinky way. It's pink. Whereas the color detector, although it might say on its little, screen or whatever on the back, it might say pink. That color detector, it doesn't get the pink experience. It doesn't have the conscious experience of pinkness because the color detector isn't conscious, whereas you are. You get the pink experience, the pink consciousness, whereas the color detector doesn't. Okay, one final example. Think about what it's like to be really hungry. It feels a certain way. And maybe you feel it in your stomach, or roughly in the stomach area. It's not the same feeling that you'd get if you were punched in the stomach, or if you got a laceration or a cut on your stomach. No, those feel different. There's that hungry feeling. It feels a certain way. That's a certain conscious experience. You're conscious of your hunger. You're aware of it, but more than just being aware of that hunger, it feels a certain way to you to be hungry. That is consciousness. Okay, so you may have noticed that I've been using at least one or two other terms for consciousness. So I used the term experience several times. What I've done is I've written up here a whole bunch of different labels that philosophers and psychologists and brain scientists use to refer to the same thing. So all of these terms are talking about the same thing. They're all talking about consciousness. When someone says phenomenal character, or they might say in one of the readings, phenomenological character, or the phenomenology of something, that all means consciousness. It all means how something feels to experience it, what it's like, what its likeness. Qualia, that's another technical term that refers to or attempts to refer to the subjective experience that human beings and other creatures have. And then also there's subjective experience or subjective character of experience or whatever. These are all synonyms. Or at least they are rough, approximate synonyms of one another. Here's the next point I want to make. not all mental states are conscious, right? So you've got all the different mental states that you can have, and then some subcategory of those are the conscious mental states. Within this category here, the conscious mental states, we're going to include all the examples that I've just been giving, like seeing something that has a certain color, or feeling hunger, or feeling sadness, or feeling the smoothness of a surface, or whatever. All of those mental events are conscious. But there are some states of the mind that aren't conscious, where there's no particular way that it feels to be in that mental state. So for example, beliefs, at least some of the time, are not conscious, right? You might believe something where it doesn't feel a certain way for you to believe it. For example, you might believe that Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on Earth. That's a belief. That's a state of your mind. And you continue believing that thing even when you're not conscious at all, even when you're asleep, right? When you're in a dreamless sleep, you're not conscious. You don't have any of this. When you're asleep and you're not dreaming at all, you're, as we say, unconscious. While you're sleeping, you still believe that Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on the planet, right? It's not like every time you wake up, you start believing it again. No. If you learned that Mount Everest was the tallest planet when you were in 4th grade or whatever, then you've believed it uninterrupted since 4th grade. It's not like you stop believing it and you start believing it every time it pops into your conscious mind. No. You've believed it the whole time, even though you haven't been thinking about Mount Everest. So the point is just that there are some mental states, like some beliefs, that are not conscious. There's nothing that it's like to be in those mental states. And then there's some mental states that are conscious. It feels a certain way to be in that mental state. Here is the definition of consciousness that Nagel uses in the article. If you're following along in the reading, this is the very end of the 3rd paragraph. It appears on page 219. An organism has conscious mental states if and only if there is something that it is like to be that organism, something it is like for the organism. Okay, we've got the idea of consciousness. Now we're ready to start talking about bats. And after we've talked about bats for a bit, we can finally get to the attack on physicalism. Bats, as you know, echolocate. That is, they open their mouths and they shriek, and then the sounds that come out of their mouths bounce off of things around them, like trees or whatever, and the sound waves bounce off the trees, and then they come back, and then I think it's through their ears, though I'm not really sure, the bats receive the sound wave signals, and then they use that data, the information of the sound waves coming back, they use that to like fly really fast at night or whatever and not bump into stuff. So bats have a sense, echolocation, that we don't have, right? Human beings can smell and taste and touch and see and hear and maybe some other things, like we might also have proprioception, that's probably another one. But anyway, we don't have echolocation. And so here's a question. What is it like to be a bat? That is, what is it like to fly around and echolocate, to map the environment around you with the sounds that you hear back? What's that like? Or to put it another way, can we imagine or understand what it's like for a bat to echolocate? Nagel thinks that the answer is definitely no. We have no idea what that feels like, what that conscious experience is like. Like, I think there was a movie or a TV show about a superhero called Daredevil who maybe was played by Ben Affleck. I'm not really sure, and I'm not willing to look it up. Anyway, the whole thing about Daredevil, I think, is that he's blind, but that he, can hear everything so well. His sense of hearing is so good that he can map the world around him such that he can, fight bad guys, in real time, even though he can't see. That's his superpower or whatever. And the movie, of course, needs to be able to represent this superpower visually on the screen. So what they do is occasionally, like during a fight scene, I don't think I've ever actually seen the whole movie. I've just seen clips of it or something. Anyway, anytime there's a fight scene, you go, in the movie, you sort of, the audience goes into the perspective of Daredevil. And what it basically looks like is it looks like seeing stuff in the world, except for everything has like a red outline. Is that what it's like for a bat to echolocate? It's like being in a world where things don't have colors, there's just objects and they all have like a red outline around them? No, that's not what it's like. That's just some stuff that some movie people made up. We have no idea what it's like to be a bat that echolocates. It's not like seeing things. It's not like that at all. And it's not like touching things. It's, you know, you wouldn't feel the smoothness or the coldness or the warmth of objects the way you do when you feel them. It's a totally different thing, and we can't imagine what it's like. And of course, you might respond to this by saying, well, look, you know, I can imagine what it's like to fly around and that sort of thing. Well, Nagel would say, you can imagine what it's like to be a human acting like a bat. Like you could put on fake wings or whatever and flap around. And then you'd know what it's like to be a human pretending to be a bat. But the question is, what is it like for a bat to be a bat? You have no idea. What's the point of this example? Nagel says the point on page 221. Whatever may be the status of facts about what it is like to be a human being, or a bat, or a Martian, these appear to be facts that embody a particular point of view. Okay, that's important. We need to write it down in the form of a slogan. So Nagel says that there are facts that embody a certain point of view, or as I've sort of rephrased it here, there are facts that can only be known by getting into a particular subjective perspective. And of course, he's talking about consciousness facts, facts about what it's like to be a certain kind of creature having certain experiences. Those facts can only be understood or only be known by getting into the perspective or the point of view of that creature. Okay, now we are ready to get the attack on physicalism. We have all the parts. We understand what consciousness is. We've made the crucial point that conscious facts embody a particular point of view or a subjective perspective on the world or something like that. Okay, we've got all of the ingredients, and now we're ready to see how Nagel uses this to show, or attempt to show, that all versions of physicalism are false. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to explain the argument. I'm just going to explain to you how the argument works, and then we're going to read a few passages from the paper, and I'm going to sort of prove to you that the argument that I just gave, that was really in the paper. It's a difficult, very abstract paper, so it sometimes can be hard to understand what's going on, and I'm going to explain it, and then I'm going to prove to you that what I explained is really what Nagel is saying in there. The crucial point is this. A physicalist theory could never capture, could never fully explain facts about experience, because physicalist theories, by definition, get away from a particular subjective point of view, and experience or consciousness just is what things are like from a particular subjective point of view. To get this point, think about the lightning example from before. There, that's my second attempt to draw lightning. You can know about lightning if you don't know anything about science, right? If you're just a cave person living thousands of years ago, you know about lightning. It rains, and sometimes there's this bright light that comes down from the sky, it seems, very quickly. There's how lightning seems to you from your particular subjective perspective, right? You're down here and you're looking at the lightning and you see it and it seems a certain way. It seems a certain way to you. What the hell does science do at this point? Well, science gets away from the subjective, the way things seem to you, and tells you how they really are, objectively speaking. Science does its thing and tells you that really, objectively, lightning is just electric discharge. That's all that lightning is. And so when science gives us this insightful, interesting, useful piece of information, it gets away from how things seem, it abandons the subjective, and it gives you the objective. how things really are, not just from a particular point of view, this particular point of view, or that particular point of view, but science tells you how things are from no point of view at all. That's like the whole point of science, is to get away from how things seem and get to how things really are. But consciousness is different, because consciousness just is the seeming. Conscious, subjective experience just is what things are like from a subjective point of view. And so if you're using the concepts of natural science, the concepts of physics and chemistry and biology, what those concepts do is they tell you how things are objectively. They never tell you how things seem subjectively. Like in the example of lightning, we can distinguish coherently between how something seems and how it really is. But when it comes to consciousness, there is no distinction between how something seems and how it really is, because that's our topic. The topic just is how things seem. Think about a particular example of conscious experience, like pain, right? You have the pain of a burning sensation. There's the objective events happening in the world, of course. Like, let's say I hold my hand over a flame and I feel a burning pain on the palm of my hand. There's the objective stuff happening to the molecules in my hand, and then there's the signal going through my nervous system. That's another objective fact, and science could tell us all about that. But the pain itself, that just is how things seem. And so it can't be that pain seems a certain way to me, but really is a different way, right? I'm talking about the pain, not about the damage, the burning damage to my hand. The burning damage to my hand, it could seem like my hand is burning when it's really not, right? Because maybe there's something wrong with the connection between my hand and my brain or whatever. But the pain itself, that sensation, that conscious experience, the qualia of pain, that can't seem one way and really be another way. If I feel like I'm in pain, then I really am in pain. Because all there is to pain and all there is to any conscious experience is just how that thing seems to you at that time. And if you tried to give an objective, physicalist, scientific characterization of pain, one that got away from how things seem from a particular point of view, well then you would just no longer be talking about pain. You get away from the phenomenon that you're trying to talk about if you're trying to talk about consciousness and you try to do it in a physicalist, scientific way. Nagel's point is that all of the versions of physicalism that we've talked about in this course, behaviorism, identity theory, functionalism, they all try to give an objective characterization of mental phenomenon. But when it comes to conscious mental phenomenon, at least, they're completely off track. There can be, according to Nagel, no science of consciousness. It's not because science is lacking or defective or anything like that. Science is great. It's just that science is the kind of thing that gets away from particular points of view. And when we're talking about consciousness, what we're talking about are particular points of view. Okay, now I want to prove to you that everything I just said, all of that stuff about consciousness being a phenomenon that is distinctively from a particular subjective point of view, and how physics or science in general gets away from particular subjective points of view, and that therefore there can be no scientific understanding of consciousness, all of that, I want to prove to you that all of that is what Nagel says in this super famous paper from 1974. So I'm just going to read some passages from that paper to you right now. Every subjective phenomenon is essentially connected with a single point of view, and it seems inevitable that an objective physical theory will abandon that point of view. That was on page 220, and then just a couple of pages later on page 222, Nagel says, "For if the facts of experience, facts about what it is like for the experiencing organism, are accessible only from one point of view, then it is a mystery how the true character of experiences could be revealed in the physical operation of that organism. The latter, and by latter he means the physical operation of that organism, is a domain of objective facts par excellence. the kind that can be observed and understood from many points of view and by individuals with differing perceptual systems. The point that he's getting at there is that the physical description of the world is the quintessential way of describing the world that can be understood to different creatures with any kind of perceptual system. So if you had a bat that could echolocate, but also had as much cognitive skill as human beings, that is, it had language and it could have complex thoughts in the way that we do, we could give a bat the same science that we have, and it could teach us all the science that it's discovered, all the physical, objective descriptions of the world, because science can be shared by different organisms with totally different types of conscious experience. But what the bat couldn't give us was some sense of what it's like to be a bat, echolocating, to fly around. And the reason that physical language can't capture that conscious experience is because it's reductive. It reduces some phenomenon to an objective set of facts that, could be understood from any perspective, from any point of view. Nagel makes this point just 3 paragraphs later, still on page 222. In other areas, he means areas of inquiry other than the study of consciousness, right? So the study of other physical phenomena or whatever. Okay. In other areas, the process of reduction is a move in the direction of greater objectivity, toward a more accurate view of the real nature of things. This is accomplished by reducing our dependence on individual or species-specific points of view toward the object of investigation. The less it depends on a specifically human viewpoint, the more objective is our description. But then he says, experience itself, however, does not seem to fit the pattern. The idea of moving from appearance to reality seems to make no sense here. Right? That was the point that I made just a couple minutes ago. When it comes to conscious experience, you can't distinguish between how things appear or how they seem and how they really truly are. Because consciousness, this thing that we're talking about right now at least, that just is the appearance, that just is the seeming. What is the analog in this case to pursuing a more objective understanding of the same phenomena by abandoning the initial subjective viewpoint toward them in favor of another that is more objective but concerns the same thing? And the presumed unspoken answer to that question that Nagel is suggesting is that there is no analog. When it comes to consciousness, you can't get away from the particular subjective initial point of view to get at a better objective understanding of the thing. Certainly, it appears unlikely that we will get closer to the real nature of human experience by leaving behind the particularity of our human point of view and striving for a description in terms accessible to beings that could not imagine what it was like to be us. If the subjective character of experience is fully comprehensible only from one point of view, then any shift to greater objectivity, that is, less attachment to a specific viewpoint, does not take us nearer to the real nature of the phenomenon. It takes us farther away from it. So that's Nagel's argument to the conclusion that physicalism is false. There's this thing in the world, consciousness, and it can never be explained in physical terms. But I just want to end on the thought that dualism might not do any better, right? Dualism is just different from physicalism in that it says that there's some other stuff, some other type of stuff in the world. Like sometimes, for example, dualists say that there is ectoplasm. Ectoplasm is just some non-physical stuff in the universe. It's the mental gook or whatever. It's not in space. It's not extended in space. It's not physical. It's the mental stuff that minds are made out of. Whatever ectoplasm is, or whatever the mental stuff is, you might think that's just more objective stuff, right? It just objectively exists and objectively has certain characteristics. Not physical characteristics, of course, but it just has some spiritual or mental characteristics or whatever. If that's right, if the dualist is just supposing or claiming that there's some more stuff in the universe, well, that's just more objective stuff. And so it's not going to do any better when it comes to explaining consciousness, if that's what dualism is and that's how we understand it. When it comes to consciousness, it seems like there's something in the universe, a very, very real thing, not some spooky, occult nonsense, but a very real thing that everyone acknowledges is real. All scientists, or almost all scientists, agree that consciousness is a real thing, right? It's in the universe. Well, when it comes to consciousness, it seems like there's some real stuff in the universe that just can never be explained objectively. And to posit some more mental, non-physical, objective stuff, that doesn't seem to help at all. Okay, that's it. We're done.